your testimony, you talked about how First Amendment activities, including speech and religious activities, can be regulated to safeguard Americans' public health. And as such, public health policies that meet these standards were upheld by the court and were not infringing on the Constitution. Is that correct?
That's correct. In many cases, the Supreme Court allowed public health regulations to stand. Those included some capacity limits. The Supreme Court has been asked to intervene on multiple occasions to invalidate vaccine mandates on religious liberty grounds. It has refused to do so. It also let stand an order that required state actors to, public schools and private schools as well, to not to have in-person learning over a temporary time period, the winter of 2020. All of those orders the Supreme Court allowed to remain in place, ostensibly because they're neutral and generally applicable.
Thank you. The suggestion that Democrats take for granted the Constitution and the rights it affords every person is dangerous and it is misleading. In fact, it's false. It undermines confidence in our institutions during times of crisis and erodes faith in our American system of government. I'd also like to note that churches were not specifically targeted through public health measures or synagogues, as we've heard, implemented by the Biden administration. And these measures did not prevent people of faith from worship. I was able to worship virtually. The faith community I participate in had outdoor services, and we had parking spaces that were reserved, and people got out their lawn chairs, and we worshiped together outside safely. Many religious institutions found innovative ways to enable their members to continue to practice their faith, be it through virtual, outdoor, or hybrid options. And many are using them today, particularly for people who we pray for as sick and shut in, who can now turn on YouTube or Facebook Live and participate with their congregations, even with emojis. So, Professor Schwartzman, with my remaining 5 seconds, I'd like to give you just a moment to correct the record on anything that you might want to share with the committee.
Thanks. I just want to agree with you that religious communities had to be creative in responding to the pandemic. I don't mean to minimize the burdens on them. They were really serious burdens, but they also acted with a sense that conforming with public health regulations was important and often consistent with their own religious obligations to save lives.
Thank you, and I yield back.
I now recognize Ms. Lesko from Arizona for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I don't even recognize the America that I grew up in anymore. I know my Democratic colleagues think we're making up stuff, but there were serious violations that happened that were upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. The government did violate constitutional rights by censoring opposing viewpoints, mandated vaccines, shut down churches, shut down some businesses while keeping others open. And right now, our Department of Justice seems to be targeting conservatives and not others with unequal justice. Fighting back against these injustices, quite frankly, is the main reason that I continue to stay in Congress. I think it's very important. I'm going to read first what Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch said, and then I'm going to ask a question of Ms. Morrell. In the Arizona versus Mayorkas case, Justice Gorsuch wrote, "Governors and local leaders imposed lockdown orders forcing people to remain in their homes. They shuttered businesses and schools, public and private. They closed churches, even as they allowed casinos and other favored businesses to carry on. They threatened violators, not just with civil penalties, but with criminal sanctions too. They surveilled church parking lots, recorded license plates, and issued notices warning that attendance at even outdoor services satisfying all state social distancing and hygiene requirements could amount to criminal conduct. Federal executive officials entered the act too. They used a workplace safety agency to issue a vaccination mandate for most working Americans. They threatened to fire non-compliant employees and warned that service members who refused to vaccinate might face dishonorable discharge and confinement. Justice Gorsuch also wrote in the Calvary Chapel, Dayton Valley versus Sisolak case, there is no world in which the Constitution permits Nevada to favor Caesar's Palace over Calvary Chapel. So my question to Ms. Morrell, do you think, well, first of all, Mr. Schwartzman said earlier that he thought the government actions were just. I may be paraphrasing. Ms. Morrell, do you think it is just for the government to keep casinos like Caesar's Palace open but shut down or severely restrict churches?
Absolutely not. And, I think we have had a lot of testimony this morning talking about broadly the broad justification for some of these mandates. And remember, this went on for 3 years. It didn't just stop and start and stop in the beginning. And they didn't evolve downward in terms of less restrictions. They were broader and broader and broader. And so it was never neutral to say that 10 people can gather in checkout line at Lowe's, but they can't stand together in church. That's not neutral. That is arbitrary. And if 10 people stood in the line at Lowe's and held their hands together and prayed, that actually wouldn't have violated the executive order,
Yeah.
I don't think. And I would like to make one point.
Thank you. I have one more question to ask.
To the good professor's responses, there is a legal limit on what the United States Supreme Court and the federal courts could do with regard to state law, and that drove a lot of the decision making. So it's simply not accurate to say that everything was that had got the big
Thank you.
checkbook of approval.
Thank you. I have one more question. I'm running out of time. Sorry. I'm going to read some emails that came from your lawsuit, Mr. Bailey, in Missouri versus Biden. One of them is from the White House, and it says, wanted to flag below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP. And then if we can keep an eye out for tweets that fall in this same genre, that would be great. Then there was another tweet, White House emailing Facebook, pushing them to censor Tucker Carlson. It says, since we've been on the phone, the top post about vaccines today is Tucker Carlson saying they don't work. Yesterday was Tommy Lehan saying she won't take one. This is exactly why I want you to know that reduction actually looks like. If reduction means pumping out more vaccine-hesitant audience with Tucker Carlson saying it doesn't work, then I'm not sure it's reduction. So they're kind of threatening Facebook in that case. Mr. Schwartzman, in his testimony, believes that coordination between the White House and social media are unverified allegations. Do you think they're unverified allegations?
Absolutely not. The emails that you're describing are the tip of the iceberg that establish not only coordination, but coercion and collusion from the very top of the White House across a spectrum of federal bureaucratic agencies to establish a vast censorship enterprise that has gone beyond COVID. COVID was the Trojan horse. That's the excuse to get the enemy behind the wall, and it's now spreading. This time, and the nature of these violations call for the necessity of a wall of separation to be erected between tech and state in order to preserve our First Amendment right to free, fair, and open debate.
Thank you. And I yield back.